AP World History Key Concepts, read by Andrew Klink. In Period 1, we look at technological and environmental transformations to the year 600 BCE. This is basically the big geography of the peopling of the Earth. The term big geography draws attention to the global nature of world history. Throughout the Paleolithic period, humans migrated from Asia to Eurasia, Australia, and the Americas. Early humans were mobile and creative in adapting to different geographical settings, from savannas to desert to ice age tundra. By making an analogy with modern hunter-forager societies, anthropologists infer that these bands were relatively egalitarian. Humans also developed varied and sophisticated technologies. Archaeological evidence indicates that during the Paleolithic era, hunter-foraging bands of humans gradually migrated from their origin in East Africa to Eurasia, Australia, and the Americas, adapting their technology and cultures to new climate regions. Humans used fire in new ways to aid hunting and foraging, to protect against predators, and to adapt to cold environments. Humans developed a wider range of tools specially adapted to different environments from tropics to tundra. Economic structures focused on small kinship groups from hunter-foraging bands that could make what they needed to survive. However, not all groups were self-sufficient. They exchanged people, ideas, and goods. The Neolithic Revolution and early agricultural societies. In response to warming climates at the end of the last ice age, from about 10,000 years ago, some groups adapted to the environment in new ways, while others remained hunter-foragers. Settled agriculture appeared in several different parts of the world. The switch to agriculture created a more reliable, but not necessarily more diversified, food supply. Agriculturalists also had a massive impact on the environment through intense cultivation of selected plants to the exclusion of others. Through the construction of irrigation systems and through the use of domesticated animals for food and for labor, populations increased, family groups gave way to village life, and later to urban life with all its complexity. Patriarchy and forced labor systems developed, giving elite men concentrated power over most of the other people in their societies. Pastoralism emerged in parts of Africa and Eurasia. Pastoral peoples domesticated animals and led their herds around grazing ranges. Like agriculturalists, pastoralists tended to be more socially stratified than hunter-foragers. Because pastoralists were mobile, they rarely accumulated large amounts of material possessions, which would have been a hindrance had they changed grazing areas. The pastoralists' mobility allowed them to become an important conduit for technological change as they interacted with settled populations. Beginning around 10,000 years ago, the Neolithic Revolution led to the development of new and more complex economic and social systems. Possibly a response to climate change, permanent agriculture villages emerged first in the lands of the Eastern Mediterranean. Agriculture emerged at different times in Mesopotamia, the Nile River Valley, and Sub-Saharan Africa, the Indus River Valley, the Yellow River or Hoang He Valley, Papua New Guinea, Mesoamerica, and the Andes. Pastoralism developed at various sites in the grasslands of Afro-Eurasia. Different crops or animals were domesticated in various core regions depending on available local flora and fauna. Agricultural communities had to work cooperatively to clear land and create the water control systems needed for crop production. These agricultural practices drastically impacted environmental diversity. Pastoralists also affected the environment by grazing large numbers of animals on fragile grasslands, leading to erosion when overgrazed. Agricultural and pastoralism began to transform human societies. Pastoralism and agriculture led to more reliable and abundant food supplies, which increased the population. Surplus of food and other goods led to specialization of labor, including new classes of artisans and warriors, and the development of elites. Technological innovation led to improvements in agriculture, production, trade, and transportation. Required examples of improvements in agriculture, production, trade, and transportation are pottery, plows, woven textiles, metallurgy, wheels, and wheeled vehicles. In both pastoralist and agrarian societies, elite groups accumulated wealth, creating more hierarchical social structures and promoting patriarchal forms of social organization. Key Concept 1.3, the development and interactions of early agricultural, pastoral, and urban societies. From about 5,000 years ago, urban societies developed, laying the foundations of the first civilizations. The term civilization is normally used to designate large societies with cities and powerful states. While there are many differences between civilizations, they also shared important features. They all produced agricultural surpluses that permitted significant specialization of labor. All civilizations contained cities and generated complex institutions, such as political bureaucracies, armies, and religious hierarchies. They also featured clearly stratified social hierarchies and organized long-distance trading relationships. Economic exchanges intensified within and between civilizations, as well as with nomadic pastoralists. As populations grew, competition for surplus resources, especially food, led to greater social stratification, specialization of labor, increased trade, more complex systems of government and religion, and the development of record keeping. As civilizations expanded, they had to balance their need for more resources with environmental constraints, such as the danger of undermining soil fertility. Finally, the accumulation of wealth in settled communities spurred warfare between communities and with pastoralists. This violence drove the development of new technologies of war and urban defense. Core and foundational civilizations developed in a variety of geographical and environmental settings where agriculture flourished. Students should be able to identify the location of all the following required examples of core and foundational civilizations: Mesopotamia in the Tigris-Euphrates river valleys, Egypt in the Nile River Valley, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in the Indus River Valley, Shang in the Yellow River and Huanghe Valley, Olmecs in Mesoamerica, Chavan in Andean, South America. The first states emerged within core civilization. States were powerful new systems of rule that mobilized surplus labor and resources over large areas. Early states were often led by a ruler whose source of power was believed to be divine, or had divine support, and/or was supported by the military. As the states grew and competed for land and resources, the more favorably situated, including the Hittites, who had access to iron, had greater access to resources, produced more surplus food, and experienced growing populations. These states were able to undertake territorial expansion and conquer surrounding states. Early regions of state expansion or empire building were Mesopotamia, Babylonia, and the Nile Valley. Pastoralists were often developers and disseminators of new weapons and modes of transportation that transformed warfare and agrarian civilizations. Some new weapons you need to know are compound bows and iron weapons, and chariots and horseback riding. Culture played a significant role in unifying states through laws, language, literature, religion, myths, and monumental art. Early civilizations developed monumental architecture and urban planning. Such monumental architecture includes ziggurats, pyramids, temples, defensive walls, streets and roads, sewage and water systems. Elites, both political and religious, promoted art and artisanship. Such art includes sculpture, painting, wall decorations, and elaborate weaving. Systems of record-keeping arose independently in all civilizations and subsequently were diffused. These record-keepings include cuneiform, hieroglyphics, pictographs, alphabets, and the quipu. States developed legal codes, including the Code of Hammurabi, that reflected existing hierarchies and facilitated the rule of government over people. New religious beliefs developed in this period continue to have strong influence in later periods. Required examples of new religious beliefs are the Vedic religion, Hebrew monotheism, and Zoroastrianism. Trade expanded through period from local to regional and transregional, with civilizations exchanging goods, cultural ideas, and technology. Required examples of trade expansion from local to regional and transregional between Egypt and Nubia, and between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Social and gender hierarchies intensified as states expanded and cities multiplied. Literature was also a reflection of culture, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Rig Veda, and the Book of the Dead. Period 2. Organization and reorganization of human society 600 to 600. The development and codification of religious and cultural traditions. As states and empires increased in size and contacts between regions multiplied, religious and cultural systems were transformed. Religious and belief systems provided a bond among the people and an ethical code to live by. These shared beliefs also influenced and reinforced political, economic, and occupational stratification. Regional and political authority often merged as the rulers, some of whom were considered divine, used religion, along with military and legal structures, to justify their rule and ensure its continuation. Religions and belief systems could also generate conflict, partly because beliefs and practices vary greatly within and among societies. Codifications and further developments of existing religious traditions provided a bond among the people and an ethical code to live by. The association of monotheism with Judaism was further developed with the codification of the Hebrew Scriptures, which also reflected the influence of Mesopotamian cultural and legal traditions. The Assyrian, Babylonian, and Roman empires conquered various Jewish states at different points in time. These conquests contributed to the growth of the Jewish diasporic communities around the Mediterranean and Middle East. The core beliefs outlined in the Sanskrit scriptures formed the basis of the Vedic religions, known as Hinduism, which contributed to the development of the social and political roles of the caste system and the importance of multiple manifestations of Brahma to promote teachings about reincarnation. New beliefs and systems, cultural traditions, and spread often asserting universal truths. The core beliefs about desire, suffering, and the search for enlightenment preached by the historic Buddha and recorded by his followers into sutras and other scriptures were in part a reaction to the Vedic beliefs and rituals dominant in South Asia. Buddhism changed over time as it spread throughout Asia, first through the support of the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, and then through the efforts of missionaries and merchants and the establishment of educational institutions to promote its core teachings. Confucianism's core beliefs and writings originated in the writings and lessons of Confucius, and were elaborated by key disciples who sought to promote social harmony by outlining proper rituals and social relationships for all people in China, including the rulers. In the major Taoist writings, the core beliefs of balance between human and nature assumed the Chinese political system would be altered indirectly. Taoism also influenced the development of Chinese culture. Some of these Chinese cultures influenced by Taoism include medical theories and practices, poetry, metallurgy, and architecture. Christianity, based on core beliefs about the teachings and divinity of Jesus of Nazareth, as recorded by his disciples, drew on Judaism and initially rejected Roman and Hellenistic influences. Despite initial Roman imperial hostility, Christianity spread through the efforts of missionaries and merchants through many parts of Afro-Eurasia, and eventually gained Roman imperial support by the Emperor Constantine. The core ideas in Greco-Roman philosophy and science emphasize logic, empirical observation, and the nature of political power and hierarchy. Belief systems affected gender roles. Buddhism and Christianity encouraged monastic life, and Confucianism emphasized filial piety. Other religious and cultural traditions continued parallel to the codified, written belief systems in core civilizations. Shamanism and animism continued to shape the lives of people within and outside core civilizations because of their daily reliance on the natural world. Ancestor veneration persisted in many regions, such as Africa, the Mediterranean region, East Asia, and the Andean areas. Artistic expressions, including literature and drama, architecture and sculpture, show distinctive cultural developments. Literature and drama acquired distinctive forms that influenced artistic developments in neighboring regions and in later time periods, such as the Greek plays and the Indian epics. Distinctive architectural styles developed in many regions in this period, including India, Greece, the Roman Empire, and Mesoamerica. The convergence of Greco-Roman culture and the Buddhist beliefs affected the development of unique sculptural developments. The development of states and empires. As the early states and empires grew in number and size and population, they frequently competed for resources and came into conflict with one another. In quest of land, wealth, and security, some empires expanded dramatically. In doing so, they built powerful military machines and administrative institutions that were capable of organizing human activities over a long distance, and they created new groups of military and political elites to manage their affairs. As these empires expanded their boundaries, they also faced the need to develop policies and procedures to govern their relationship with ethnically and culturally diverse populations, sometimes to integrate them within an imperial society and sometimes to exclude them. In some cases, these empires became victims of their own successes. By expanding their boundaries too far, they created political, cultural, and administrative difficulties that they could not manage. They also experienced environmental, social, and economic problems when they overexploited their lands and subjects and permitted excessive wealth to be concentrated in the hands of privileged classes. The number and size of key states and empires grew dramatically by imposing political unity on areas where previously there had been competing states. Required examples of key states and empires Southwest Asia, Persian empires, East Asia, Qin and Han Empire, South Asia, Mauryan and Gupta empires, Mediterranean region, Phoenicia and its colonies, Greek city-states and colonies, Hellenistic and Roman empires, Mesoamerica, Teotihuacan, Maya city-states, Andean South America, the Moche. For the Persian empires, you should know the Achaemenid, Parthian, and Sassanid. Empires and states developed new techniques of imperial administration based in part on the success of earlier political forms. In order to organize their subjects, the rulers created administrative institutions in many regions. Required examples of administrative institutions include centralized governments and elaborate legal systems and bureaucracies. You should know that these existed in China, Persia, Rome, and South Asia. Imperial governments projected military power over larger areas using a variety of techniques. Required examples of such techniques include diplomacy, developing supply lines, building fortifications, defensive walls, and roads, drawing new groups of military officers and soldiers from the local population or conquered peoples. Much of the success of the empires rested on the promotion of trade and economic integration of building and maintaining roads and issuing currencies. Unique social and economic dimensions developed in imperial societies in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. Cities served as the centers of trade, public performance of religious ritual, and the political administration for states and empires. Some of these cities include Persepolis, Chang'an, Pataliputra, Athens, Carthage, Rome, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Teotihuacan. The social structures of empires displayed hierarchies that included cultivators, laborers, slaves, artisans, merchants, elites, and caste groups. Imperial societies relied on a range of methods to maintain the production of food and provide rewards for the loyalty of the elites. Methods of forced labor included corvée, slavery, rents and tributes, peasant communities, family and household production. Patriarchy continued to shape gender and family relations in all imperial societies of this period. The Roman and Han, Persian, Mauryan, and Gupta empires created political, cultural, and administrative difficulties that they could not manage, which eventually led to their decline, collapse, and transformation into successor empires or states. Through excessive mobilization of resources, imperial governments caused environmental damage and generated social tensions and economic difficulties by concentrating too much wealth in the hands of elites. These include deforestation, desertification, soil erosion, and silted rivers. External problems resulted from security issues along their frontiers, including the threat of invasion. These include frontier problems between the Han China and Xiongnu, the Gupta and White Huns, and the Romans and their northern and eastern neighbors. Key Concept 2.3: Emergence of Trans-Regional Networks of Communication and Exchange. With the organization of large-scale empires, the volume of long-distance trade increased dramatically. Much of this trade resulted in the demand for raw materials and luxury goods. Land and water routes linked many regions of the Eastern Hemisphere. The exchange of people, technology, religious and cultural beliefs, food crops, domesticated animals, and disease pathogens developed alongside the trade in goods across far-flung networks of communication and exchange. In the Americas and Oceania, localized networks developed. Land and water routes became the basis of trans-regional trade communication and exchange networks in the Eastern Hemisphere. Many factors, including the climate and location of routes, the typical trade routes, goods, and the ethnicity of people involved, shaped the distinctive features of a variety of trade routes. Required examples of trade routes: Eurasian Silk Roads, Trans-Saharan caravan routes, Indian Ocean sea lanes, Mediterranean sea lanes. New technologies facilitated long-distance communication and exchange. New technologies permitted the use of domesticated pack animals to transport across longer routes. These included yokes, saddles, and stirrups, and the animals included horses, oxen, llamas, and camels. Innovations in maritime technologies as well advanced knowledge of the monsoon winds, stimulated exchange along maritime routes from East Africa to East Asia. These new technologies included lateen sails and dhow ships. Along the trade in goods, the exchange of people's technology, religious and cultural beliefs, food crops, domesticated animals, and disease pathogens developed across far-flung networks of communication and exchange. The spread of crops included rice and cotton from South Asia to the Middle East and encouraged changes in farming and irrigation techniques, such as the Qanat system. The spread of disease pathogens diminished urban populations and contributed to the decline of some empires. These included the effects of disease on the Roman Empire and the Chinese empires. Religious and cultural traditions were transformed as they spread. Required examples of transformed religious and cultural traditions include Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Period 3. Regional and transregional interactions from 600 to 1450. Expansion and intensification of communication and exchange networks. Although Afro-Eurasia and the Americas remained separate from one another, this era witnessed a deepening and widening of old and new networks of human interaction within and across regions. The results were unprecedented concentration of wealth and intensification of cross-cultural exchanges. Innovations in transportation, state policies, and mercantile practices contributed to expansion and development of commercial networks, which in turn served as conduits for cultural, technological, and biological diffusion within and between various societies. Pastoral or nomadic groups played a key role in creating and sustaining these networks. Expanding networks fostered greater interregional borrowing, while at the same time sustaining regional diversity. The Prophet Muhammad promoted Islam, a new major monotheistic religion, at the start of this period. It spread quickly through the practices of trade, warfare, and the diffusion characteristics of this period. Improved transportation technologies and commercial practices led to an increased volume of trade and expanded the geographical range of existing and newly active trade networks. Existing trade routes flourished and promoted the growth of powerful new trading cities. Required examples of trade routes include the Silk Roads, the Mediterranean Sea, the Trans-Saharan, and the Indian Ocean basins. These new trading cities include Novgorod, Timbuktu, the Swahili city-states, Hangzhou, Calicut, Baghdad, Malacca, Venice, Tenochtitlan, and Cahokia. New trade routes centering on Mesoamerica and the Andes developed. The growth of interregional trade in luxury goods was encouraged by significant innovations in previously existing transportation and commercial technologies, including more sophisticated caravan organization, use of the compass, astrolabe, and larger ship designs in sea travel, and new forms of credit and monetization. Such luxury goods included silk and cotton textiles, porcelain, spices, precious metals and gems, slaves, and exotic animals. Such caravan organization included the caravanserai and camel saddles, and monetization included bills of exchange, credit, checks, and banking houses. Commercial growth was also facilitated by state practices, trading organizations, and state-sponsored commercial infrastructures like the Grand Canal in China. Other state practices included minting of coins and the use of paper money, and trading organization included the Hanseatic League. The expansion of empires facilitated trans-Eurasian trade and communication as new peoples were drawn into their conquerors' economies and trade networks. Required examples of empires include China, the Byzantine Empire, the Caliphates, and the Mongols. The movement of peoples caused environmental and linguistic effects. The expansion and intensification of long-distance trade routes often depended on environmental knowledge and technological adaptation to it. Such of these include the Scandinavian Vikings using longships to travel the coastal and open waters as well as in rivers and estuaries, the way Arabs and Berbers adapted camels to travel across and around the Sahara, the way Central Asian pastoral groups used horses to travel in the steppes. Some migrations had a significant environmental effect. Required examples of migration and their environmental impact include the migration of Bantu-speaking peoples who facilitated transmission of iron technologies and agricultural techniques into sub-Saharan Africa, the maritime migrations of Polynesian peoples who cultivated transplanted foods and domesticated animals as they moved into new islands. Some migrations in commercial contexts led to the diffusion of new languages through the new region or emergence of new languages. These include the spread of Bantu languages, including Swahili, and the spread of Turkic and Arabic languages. Cross-cultural exchanges were fostered by the intensification of existing and the creation of new networks of trade and communication. Islam, based on the revelations of Prophet Muhammad, developed in the Arabian Peninsula. The belief and practices of Islam reflected interactions among Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrianism with the local Arabian people. Muslim rule expanded to many parts of Afro-Eurasia due to military expansion, and Islam subsequently expanded through the activities of merchants and missionaries. In key places along important trade routes, merchants set up diasporic communities where they introduced their own cultural traditions into indigenous culture, such as Muslim merchant communities in the Indian Ocean region, Chinese merchant communities in Southeast Asia, Sogdian merchant communities throughout Central Asia, and Jewish communities in the Mediterranean Indian Ocean basin or along the Silk Road. The writings of certain interregional travelers illustrated both the extent and limitations of interregional knowledge and understanding. These included Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo, and Chuang-Zhang. Increased cross-cultural interaction resulted in the diffusion of literary, artistic, and cultural traditions. These included the influence of Neo-Confucianism and Buddhism in East Asia, Hinduism and Buddhism in Southwest Asia, Islam in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, Toltec, Mexica, and Inca traditions in Mesoamerica and Andean America. Increased cross-cultural interactions also resulted in the diffusion of scientific and technological traditions. These included the influence of Greek and Indian mathematics on Muslim scholars, the return of Greek science and philosophy to Western Europe via Muslim El-Andalus in Iberia, and the spread of printing and gunpowder technologies from East Asia into the Islamic empires in Western Europe. There was continued diffusion of crop and pathogens throughout Eastern Hemisphere along the trade routes. New foods and agricultural techniques were adopted in populated areas, and these spread epidemic diseases including the Black Death, followed the well-established class and trade and military conquest. The new foods included bananas in Africa, new rice varieties in East Asia, the spread of cotton, sugar, and citrus through Dar al-Islam and the Mediterranean basin. Key Concept 3.2, Continuity and Innovation of State Forms and Their Interactions. State formation in this era demonstrated remarkable continuity, innovation, and diversity in various regions. In Afro-Eurasia, some states attempted, with differing degrees of success, to preserve or revive imperial structures, with smaller, less centralized states continued to develop. The expansion of Islam introduced a new concept, the Caliphate, to Afro-Eurasian statecraft. Pastoral peoples in Eurasia built powerful and distinctive empires that integrated people and institutions from both pastoral and agrarian worlds in the Americas. These powerful states developed in both Mesoamerica and the Andean region. Empire collapsed and were reconstituted in some regions. New state forms emerged. Following the collapse of empires, most reconstituted governments, including the Byzantine Empire and the Chinese dynasties of Sui, Tang, and Song, combined traditional sources of power and legitimacy with innovations better suited to the current circumstances. These included the patriarchy, religion, and landowning elites, and new innovations included new tax methods, tributary systems, adaptation of religious institutions. In some places, new forms of government emerged, including those developed in various Islamic states, the Mongol Khanates, city-states, and decentralized government, feudalism in Europe and Japan. The Abbasids, Muslim Iberia, and Delhi Sultanates were all Islamic states, and other city-states included the Italian Peninsula, East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Americas. Some states synthesized local and borrowed traditions, including Persian traditions that influenced Islamic states, and the Chinese traditions that influenced states in Japan. In the Americas, as in Afro-Eurasia, state systems expanded in scope and reach. Networks of city-states flourished in the Mayan region, and at the end of this period, imperial systems were created by the Mexica Aztecs and Inca. Interregional contexts and conflicts between states and empires encouraged significant technological and cultural transfers. Required examples of technological and cultural transfers include that between the Tang China and Abbasids, across Mongol empires, and during the Crusades. Key Concept 3.3, Increased Economic Productive Capacity and its Consequences. Changes in trade networks resulted from and stimulated increasing productivity capacity. with important implications for social and gender structures and environmental processes. Productivity rose in both agricultural and industry. Rising productivity supported population growth and urbanization, but also strained environmental resources and at times caused dramatic demographic swings. Shifts in production and the increased volume of trade also stimulated new labor practices, including adaptation of existing patterns of free and coerced labor. Social and gender structures evolved in response to these changes. Innovation stimulated agricultural and industrial production in many regions. Agricultural production increased significantly due to technological innovation. These technological innovations included the Champa rice varieties, the Chinampa field system, the Waru agricultural techniques in the Andean areas, improved terracing techniques, and the horse collar. In response to increasing demand in Afro-Eurasia for foreign luxury goods, crops were transported from their indigenous homeland to equivalent climates in other regions. Chinese, Persian, and Indian artisans and merchants expanded their production of textiles and porcelains for export. Industrial production of iron and steel expanded in China. The fate of cities varied greatly, with periods of significant decline and with periods of increased urbanization buoyed by rising productivity and expanding trade networks. Multiple factors contributed to the decline of urban areas in this period. Required examples of these factors were invasions, diseases, the decline of agricultural productivity, the Little Ice Age. Multiple factors contributed to urban revival, including the end of invasions, the availability of safe and reliable transport, the rise of commerce in the warmer temperatures between 800 and 1300, increased agricultural productivity and subsequent rising population. Greater availability of labor also contributed to urban growth. While cities in general continued to play the roles they played in the past as governmental, religious, and commercial centers, many older cities declined at the same time that numerous new cities emerged to take on the established roles. Despite significant continuities in social structures and in methods of production, there are also some important changes in labor management and the effect of the religious conversion on gender relations in the family life. As in the previous period, there were many forms of labor organization. Required examples of forms of labor organization include free peasant agriculture, nomadic pastoralism, craft production and guild organization, various forms of coerced and unfree labor, government-imposed labor taxes, and military obligation. As in the previous period, social structures were shaped largely by class and caste hierarchies. Patriarchy persisted, however, in some areas women exercised more power and influence, most notably among the Mongols and in West Africa, Japan, and Southeast Asia. New forms of coerced labor appeared, including serfdom in Europe and Japan and the elaboration of the Mita system in the Incan Empire. Free peasants resisted attempts to raise dues and taxes by staging revolts. The demand for slaves for both military and domestic purposes increased, particularly in Central Eurasia, parts of Africa, and Eastern Mediterranean. Free peasants revolted in China and the Byzantine Empire. The diffusion of Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Neo-Confucianism often led to significant changes in gender relations and family structure. Period 4. Global Interactions, 1450 to 1750. Key Concept 4.1, Globalization Networks of Communication and Exchange. The interconnection of the Eastern and Western hemispheres made possible by transoceanic voyaging marked a key transformation of this period. Technological innovations helped to make transoceanic connections possible. Changing patterns of long-distance trade included the global circulation of some commodities and the formation of new regional markets and financial centers. Increased transregional and global trade networks facilitated the spread of religion and other elements of culture, as well as the migration of large numbers of people. Germs carried to the Americas ravaged the indigenous peoples, while the global exchange of crops and animals altered agriculture, diets, and population around the planet. In the context of the new global circulation of goods, there was an intensification of all existing regional trade networks that brought prosperity and economic disruption to the merchants and governments in the trading regions of the Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, Sahara, and overland Eurasia. European technological developments in cartography and navigation built on previous knowledge developed in classical Islamic and Asian worlds, and included the production of new tools, innovations in ship design, and the improved understanding of global wind and current patterns, all of which made transoceanic travel and trade possible. These new tools included the astrolabe and revised maps, and the new innovations in ship designs included the caravel. Remarkable new transoceanic maritime reconnaissance occurred in this period. Official Chinese maritime activity expanded into the Indian Ocean region with the naval voyages led by Ming Admiral Zheng He, which enhanced Chinese prestige. Portuguese development of a school of navigation led to increased travel to and trade with West Africa and resulted in the construction of a global trading post empire. Spanish sponsorship of the first Columbian and subsequent voyages across the Atlantic and Pacific dramatically increased European interest in transoceanic travel and trade. Northern Atlantic crossing for fishing and settlements continued and spurred European searches for multiple routes to Asia. In Oceania and Polynesia, established exchange and communication networks were not dramatically affected because of infrequent European reconnaissance in the Pacific Ocean. The new global circulation of goods was facilitated by royal chartered European monopoly companies that took silver from Spanish colonies in the Americas to purchase Asian goods for the Atlantic markets. But regional markets continue to flourish in Afro-Eurasia by using established commercial practices and new transoceanic shipping services developed by European merchants. European merchants' role in Asian trade was characterized mostly by transporting goods from one Asian country to another market in Asia or in the Indian Ocean region. Commercialization and the creation of global economy were intimately connected to new global circulation of silver from the Americas. Influenced by mercantilism, joint stock companies were new methods used by European rulers to control their domestic and colonial economies and by European merchants to compete against one another in global trade. The Atlantic system involved the movement of goods, wealth, and free and unfree laborers, and the mixing of African American and European cultures and peoples. The new connections between the eastern and western hemispheres resulted in the Columbian Exchange. European colonization of the Americas led to the spread of diseases, including smallpox, measles, influenza, that were endemic in the eastern hemisphere among Amerindian populations, and the unintentional transfer of vermin, including mosquitoes and rats. American foods became staple crops in various parts of Europe and Asia and Africa. Cash crops were grown primarily on plantations with coarse labor and were exported mostly to Europe and the Middle East in this period. American foods included potatoes, maize, and manioc, and cash crops included sugar and tobacco. Afro-Eurasian fruit trees and grains, sugar, and domesticated animals were brought by Europeans to the Americas, while other foods were brought by African slaves. Domesticated animals, such as horses, pigs, and cattle, and foods brought by Africans were okra and rice. Population in the Afro-Eurasia benefited nutritionally from increased diversity of American food crops. European colonization and the introduction of European agriculture and settlement practices in the Americas often affected the physical environment through deforestation and soil depletion. The increase in interactions between newly connected hemispheres and the intensification of connections within hemispheres expanded the spread and reform of existing religions and created syncretic belief systems and practices. As Islam spread to new settings in Afro-Eurasia, believers adapted to its local cultural practices. The split between Sunni and Shia traditions of Islam intensified, and Sufi practices became more widespread. The practice of Christianity continued to spread throughout the world, as was increasingly diversified by the process of diffusion and the Reformation. Buddhism spread within Asia, and syncretic and new forms of religions developed, such as Vodun in the Caribbean, the Cult of the Saints in Latin America, and Sikhism in South Asia. As merchants' profits increased and governments collected more taxes, funding for the visual and performing arts, even for popular audiences, increased. Innovations in visual and performing arts were all seen all around the world, including Renaissance art in Europe, miniature painting in the Middle East and South Asia, woodblock prints in Japan, and the post-conquest codices in Mesoamerica. Literacy expanded and was accompanied by a proliferation of popular authors, literary forms, and works of literature in Afro-Eurasia, including Shakespeare, Cervantes, Sundiata, Journey to the West, and Kabuki. Key Concept 4.2 New Forms of Social Organization and Modes of Production. Although the world's productive systems continue to be heavily centered on agricultural production throughout the period, major changes occurred in agricultural labor. The systems and locations of manufacturing, gender and social structures, environmental processes, a surge in agricultural productivity resulted from new methods in crop and field rotation and the introduction of new crops. Economic growth also depended on new forms of manufacturing and new commercial patterns, especially in long-distance trade. Political and economic centers within regions shifted, and merchant social status tended to rise in various states. Demographic growth, even in areas such as the Americas, where disease had ravaged population, were restored by the 18th century and surged in many regions, especially in the introduction of American food crops throughout the Eastern Hemisphere. The Columbian Exchange led to new ways of humans interacting with the environment. New forms of coerced and semi-coerced labor emerged in Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and affected ethnic and racial classification and gender roles. Traditional peasant agriculture increased and changed, plantations expanded, and demand for labor increased. These changes both fed and responded to growing demand of raw materials and finished products. Peasant labor increased in many areas, such as the development of frontier settlements in Russian Siberia, cotton textile production in India, and silk textile production in China. Slavery in Africa continued, both the traditional incorporation of slaves into households and the export of slaves to the Mediterranean and the East Indian Ocean. The growth of the plantation economy increased the demand for slaves in the Americas. Colonial encomiendas in the Americas depended on a range of coerced labor, such as chattel slavery, indentured servitude, encomienda and hacienda systems, and the Spanish adaptation of the Inca Mita. As new social and political elites changed, they also restructured new ethnic, racial, and gender hierarchies. Both imperial conquest and widening global economic opportunities contributed to the formation of new political and economic elites. These new elites included the Manchus in China, Creole elites in Spanish America, the European gentry, and urban commercial entrepreneurs in all major port cities in the world. The power of existing political and economic elites fluctuated as they confronted new challenges to their ability to affect the policies of increasingly powerful monarchs and leaders. These included the Zamindars in Mughal Empire, the nobility in Europe, and the daimyo in Japan. Some notable gender and family restructuring occurred, including the demographic changes in Africa that resulted from the slave trade. These included the dependence of European men on Southeast Asian women for conducting trade in that region, and the smaller size of European families. The massive demographic change in the Americas resulted in new ethnic and racial classifications, including Mestizo, Mulatto, and Creole. Key Concept 4.3 State Consolidation and Imperial Expansion. Empires expanded and conquered new peoples around the world, but they often had difficulties incorporating culturally, ethnically, and religiously diverse subjects and administering widely dispersed territories. Agents of European powers moved into existing trade networks around the world in Africa and the greater Indian Ocean. Nascent European empires consisted mainly of interconnected trading posts and enclaves, and the American European empires moved more quickly to settlement and territorial control, responding to local demographic and commercial conditions. Moreover, the creation of European empires in the Americas quickly fostered a new Atlantic trade system that included transatlantic slave trade. Around the world, empires and states of varying sizes pursued strategies of centralization, including more efficient taxation systems that placed strains on peasant producers, sometimes prompting local rebellion. Rulers used public displays of art and architecture to legitimize state power. African states shared certain characteristics with larger Eurasian empires. Changes in African and global trading patterns strengthened some West and Central African states, especially on the coast. This led to the rise of new states and contributed to the decline of states on both the coast and the interior. Rulers used a variety of methods to legitimize and consolidate the power. Rulers used the arts to display political power and to legitimize their rule, including monumental architecture, urban design, courtly literature, and the visual arts. Rulers continued to use religious ideas to legitimize their rule, such as the European notions of divine right, Safavid use of Shi'ism, Mexico or Aztec practices of human sacrifice, Songhay promotion of Islam, Chinese emperors' public performance of Confucian rituals. States treated different ethnic and religious groups in ways that utilized their economic contributions while limiting their ability to challenge the authority of the state. Ottomans' treatment of non-Muslim subjects, Manchu policy towards Chinese, Spanish creation of the separate República de Indios. Recruitment and use of bureaucratic elites, as well as the development of military professionals, became more common among rulers who wanted to maintain centralized control over their populations and resources. These included the Ottoman Dervishurme, Chinese examination system, and salaried samurai. Rulers used tribute collection and tax farming to generate revenues for territorial expansion. Imperial expansion relied on the increased use of gunpowder, cannons, armed trade, the establishment of large empires in both hemispheres. Europeans established new trading post empires in Africa and Asia, which proved profitable for the rulers and merchants involved in new global trade networks, but these empires also affected the power of the states in interior and West Africa, Central Africa. Land empires expanded dramatically in size. Required examples of land empires include Manchus and Mughals, Ottomans, and Russians. European states established new maritime empires in the Americas. Required examples of maritime empires include Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, and British. Competition over trade routes, state rivalries, and local resistance all provided significant challenges to state consolidation and expansion, including the Omani-European rivalry in the Indian Ocean and piracy in the Caribbean. State rivalries included the 30 Years' War and the Ottoman-Safavid conflicts, and local resistance included food riots, samurai riots, and peasant uprisings. Period 5. Industrialization and Global Integration, 1750 to 1900. Key Concept 5.1, Industrialization and Global Capitalism. Industrialization fundamentally altered the production of goods around the world. It not only changed how goods were produced and consumed as well as what was considered a good, but it also had far-reaching effects on the global economy, social relations, and culture. Although it is common to speak of an industrial revolution, the process of industrialization was a gradual one that unfolded over the course of the 18th and 19th centuries, eventually becoming global. Industrialization fundamentally changed how goods were produced. A variety of factors led to the rise of industrial production. Europe's location on the Atlantic Ocean, the geographical distribution of coal, iron, and timber, European demographic changes, urbanization, improved agricultural productivity, legal protection of private property, an abundance of rivers and canals, access to foreign resources, and the accumulation of capital. The development of machines, including steam engines and the internal combustion engine, made it possible to exploit vast new resources of energy stored in fossil fuels, specifically coal and oil. Fossil fuels revolutionized greatly increased energy consumed by human society. The development of the factory system concentrated labor in a single location and led to an increasing degree of specialization of labor. As the new methods of industrial production became more common in parts of northwestern Europe, they spread to other parts of Europe, the United States, Russia, and Japan. The Second Industrial Revolution led to new methods in the production of steel, chemicals, and electricity, and the precision machinery during the second half of the 19th century. New patterns of global trade and production developed and further integrated the global economy as industrialists sought new raw materials and new markets for increasing amount of array of goods produced in their factories. The need for raw materials for the factories increased food supplies for the growing population in the urban centers led to a growth of export economies around the world that specialized in mass-producing single natural resources. The profits of these resources were used to purchase finished goods. These included cotton, rubber, palm oil, sugar, wheat, meat, guano, and metals and minerals. The rapid development of industrial production contributed to the decline of economically productive agriculturally based economies, such as textile production in India. The rapid increases in productivity caused by industrial production encouraged industrialized states to seek out new consumer markets for their finished goods, including the British and French attempts to open up the Chinese market during the 19th century. The need for specialized and limited metals for industrial production, as well as the global demand for gold, silver, and diamonds as forms of wealth, led to the development of extensive mining centers, such as copper mines in Mexico and the gold and diamond mines in South Africa. To facilitate investments at all levels of industrial production, financiers developed and expanded various financial institutions. The ideological inspiration for economic changes lies in the development of capitalism and classical liberalism associated with Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill. Financial instruments expanded, including the stock market, insurance, gold standard, and the limited liability corporations. The global nature of trade and production contributed to the proliferation of large-scale transnational businesses, including the United Fruit Company and HSBC, Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. These were major developments in transportation and communication, including the railroad, steamship, telegraph, and canals. The development and spread of global capitalism led to a variety of responses. In industrialized states, many workers organized themselves to improve working conditions, limit hours, and gain higher wages, while others opposed capitalist exploitation of workers by promoting alternative visions of society, including utopian socialism, Marxism, and anarchism. In Qing China and Ottoman Empire, some members of the government resisted economic change and attempted to maintain pre-industrial forms of economic production. In a small number of states, governments promoted their own state-sponsored visions of industrialization, including economic reforms in Meiji Japan, the development of factories and railroads in Tsarist Russia, Chinese self-strengthening movement, and Muhammad Ali's development of cotton textile industry in Egypt. In response to criticisms of industrial global capitalism, some governments mitigated the negative effects of industrial capitalism by promoting various types of reforms. These reforms included state pensions and public health in Germany, expansion of suffrage in Britain, public education in many states. The ways in which people organized themselves into societies also underwent significant transformation in the industrialized states due to fundamental restructuring of the global economy. New social classes, including the middle class and industrial working class, developed. Family dynamics, gender roles, and demographics changed in response to industrialization. And rapid urbanization that accompanied global capitalism often led to unsanitary conditions as well as to new forms of community. Key Concept 5.2 Imperialism in the Nation-State Formation. As states industrialized during the period, they also expanded their existing overseas colonies and established new types of colonies and transoceanic empires. Regional warfare and diplomacy both resulted in were affected by the process of modern empire building. The process was led mostly by Europe, although not all states were affected equally, which led to an increase of European influence around the world. The United States and Japan also participated in the process. This growth of new empires challenged the power of existing land-based empires of Eurasia. New ideas about nationalism, race, gender, class, and culture also developed that facilitated the spread of transoceanic empires as well as justified anti-imperial resistance and the formation of new national identities. Industrialization powered established transoceanic empires. States with existing colonies strengthened their control over those colonies, including the British in India and Dutch in Indonesia. European states, as well as the Americans and Japanese, established empires throughout Asia and the Pacific, while the Spanish and Portuguese influence declined. The European states establishing colonies included Britain, the Dutch, French, German, and Russian. Many European states used both warfare and diplomacy to establish empires in Africa, including Britain in West Africa and Belgium in the Congo. In some parts of their empires, Europeans established settler colonies, including the British in southern Africa, Australia and New Zealand, and the French in Algeria. In other parts of the world, industrialized states practiced economic imperialism, including the British and French expanding their influence in China through the Opium Wars, and the British and Americans investing heavily in Latin America. Imperialism influenced states in formation of contraction around the world. The expansion of U.S. and European influence over Tokugawa Japan led to the emergence of Meiji Japan. The United States and Russia emulated European transoceanic imperialism by expanding their land borders and conquering neighboring territories. Anti-imperial resistance led to the contraction of the Ottoman Empire. This included the establishment of independent states in the Balkans, semi-independence in Egypt, French and Italian colonies in North Africa, and the later British influence in Egypt. New states developed on the edge of existing empires, such as the Cherokee Nation, Siam, Hawaii, and the Zulu Kingdom. The development and spread of nationalism as an ideology fostered new communal identities, such as the German nation, the Filipino nationalism, and Liberian nationalism. New racial ideologies, especially social Darwinism, facilitated and justified imperialism. Nationalism, Revolution, and Reform, Key Concept 5.3. The 18th century marked the beginning of an intense period of revolution and rebellion against existing governments and the establishment of new nation-states around the world. Enlightenment thought and the resistance of colonized people to imperial centers shaped the revolutionary activity. These rebellions sometimes resulted in the formation of new states and stimulated the development of new ideologies. These new ideas in turn further stimulated the revolutionary and anti-imperial tendencies of this period. The rise and diffusion of Enlightenment thought that questioned established traditions in all areas of life often preceded the revolutions and the rebellions against existing governments. Thinkers applied new ways of understanding the natural world to human relationship, encouraging observation and
inference in all spheres of life. These include Voltaire and Rousseau. Intellectuals critiqued the role of religion played in public life, insisting of the importance of reason as opposed to revelation. Enlightenment thinkers developed new political ideas about the individual, natural rights, and social contract, including Locke and Montesquieu. The ideas of Enlightenment thinkers influenced resistance to existing political authority as reflected in the revolutionary documents, including the American Declaration of Independence, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and Bolivar's Jamaica Letter. These ideas influenced many people to challenge existing notions of social relations, which led to the expansion of rights as seen as expanded suffrage, the abolition of slavery, and the end of serfdom, as their ideas were implemented. Beginning in the 18th century, peoples around the world developed a new sense of commonality based on language, religion, and social customs and territory. These newly imagined national communities linked the identity with the borders of states, while governments used these ideas to unite diverse populations. Increasing discontent with imperial rule propelled reformist and revolutionary movements. Subjects challenged the centralized imperial governments, such as the challenge of the Marathas to the Mughal sultans. American colonial subjects led to a series of rebellions, which facilitated the emergence of independent states in the United States, Haiti, and mainland Latin America. French subjects rebelled against their monarchy. Required examples of rebellion include the American Revolution, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, and Latin American independence movements. Slave resistance challenged existing authorities in the Americas, such as the establishment of Maroon societies. Increasing questions about the political authority and growing nationalism contributed to anti-colonial movements, including the Indian Revolt of 1857 and the Boxer Rebellion. Some of the rebellions were influenced by religious ideas in millennialism, including the Taiping Rebellion, the Ghost Dance, and the Xhosa cattle-killing movement. Responses to increasingly frequent rebellions led to reforms in imperial policies, including the Tanzimat reforms and the self-strengthening movement. The global spread of European political thought and increasing number of rebellions stimulated new transnational ideologies and solidarities. Discontent with monarchist and imperial rule encouraged the development of political ideologies including liberalism, socialism, and communism. Demands for women's suffrage and the emergent feminism challenged political and gender hierarchies, including Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Olympe de Gouges' Declaration of the Rights of Women and Female Citizen, and the resolutions passed at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. Key Concept 5.4 Global Migration. Migration patterns changed dramatically throughout the period, and the number of migrants increased significantly. These changes were closely connected to the development of transoceanic empires and the global capitalist economy. In some cases, people benefited economically from migration, while other peoples were seen simply as commodities to be transported. In both cases, migration produced dramatically different societies for sending and receiving societies, and presented challenges to governments in fostering national identities and regulating the flow of people. Migration, in many cases, was influenced by changes in demography in both industrialized and unindustrialized societies that presented challenges to existing patterns of living. Changes in food production and improved medical condition contributed to the significant global rise in population. Because of the nature of the new modes of transportation, both internal and external migrants increasingly relocated to cities. The pattern contributed to the significant global urbanization of the 19th century. Migrants relocated for a variety of reasons. Many individuals chose freely to relocate, often in search of work, including manual laborers and specialized laborers. New global capitalist economy continued to rely on coerced and semi-coerced labor migrations, including slavery, Chinese and Indian indentured servitude, and convict labor. While many migrants permanently relocated, a significant number of temporary and seasonal migrants returned to their home societies, including Japanese agricultural workers in the Pacific, Lebanese merchants in the Americas, and Italians in Argentina. The large-scale nature of migration, especially in the 19th century, produced a variety of consequences and reactions to increased diverse societies on the part of migrants and the existing populations. Due to the physical nature of the labor and demand, migrants tended to be male, leaving women to take on new roles to the home and society that had been formerly occupied by men. Migrants often created ethnic enclaves in different parts of the world, which helped transplant their culture into new environments and facilitated the development of migrant support networks. These included the Chinese in Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, South America, and North America, and Indians in East and Southern Africa, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. Receiving societies did not always embrace immigrants, as seen in the various degrees of ethnic and racial prejudice and the ways states attempted to regulate the increased flow of people across the borders. These included the Chinese Exclusion Acts and the White Australia policy. Period 6. Accelerating Global Change and Realignments, 1900 to the present. Key Concept 6.1. Science and the Environment. Rapid advances in science altered the understanding of the universe and the natural world and led to the development of new technologies. These changes enabled unprecedented population growth, which altered humans, interacted with the environment, and threatened delicate ecological balances at local, regional, and global levels. Researchers made advances in science that spread throughout the world, assisted by the development of new technology. New modes of communication and transportation virtually eliminated the problems of geographical distance. New scientific paradigms transformed human understanding of the world, including the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, the Big Bang Theory, and psychology. The Green Revolution produced food for the Earth's growing population as it spread chemically and genetically enhanced forms of agriculture. Medical innovation increased the ability of humans to survive, including the polio vaccine, antibiotics, and the artificial heart. Energy technologies, including the use of oil and nuclear power, raised productivity and increased production of material goods. As the global population expanded at an unprecedented rate, humans fundamentally changed their relationship with the environment. Humans exploited and competed over the Earth's finite resources more intensely than ever before in human history. Global warming was a major consequence of the release of greenhouse gases and other pollutants into the atmosphere, and pollution threatened the world's supply of water and clean air. Deforestation and desertification were continuing consequences of the human impact on the environment. Rates of extinction of other species accelerated sharply. Diseases, scientific innovation, conflict led to demographic shifts. Diseases associated with poverty persisted, while other diseases emerged as new epidemics and threats to human survival. In addition, changing lifestyles and increasing longevity led to higher incidence of certain diseases. Diseases of poverty included malaria, tuberculosis, and cholera. Emergent epidemic diseases included the 1918 influenza pandemic, Ebola, and HIV/AIDS. And diseases of changing lifestyles include diabetes, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. More effective forms of birth control gave women greater control over fertility and transformed sexual practices. Improved military technology and new tactics led to increased levels of wartime casualties, including tanks, airplanes, and the atomic bomb, new tactics including trench warfare and firebombing, and wartime casualties in places like Nanjing, Dresden, and Hiroshima. Key Concept 6.2 Global Conflicts and Their Consequences. At the beginning of the 20th century, a European-dominated global political order existed, which also included the United States, Russia, and Japan. Over the course of the century, peoples and states around the world challenged this order in ways that sought to redistribute power within the existing order and to restructure empires. While those peoples and states in power attempted to maintain the status quo, other peoples and states sought to overturn the political order itself. These challenges, too, and the attempts to maintain the political order manifested themselves in unprecedented levels of conflict with high human casualties. In the context of these conflicts, many regimes in both older and newer states struggled with maintaining political stability and were challenged by internal and external factors, including ethnic and religious conflicts, secessionist movements, territorial partitions, economic dependency, and the legacies of colonialism. Europe dominated the global political order at the beginning of the 20th century, but both land-based and transoceanic empires gave way to new forms of trans-regional political organization by the century's end. The older land-based Ottoman Empire and Qing empires collapsed due to the combination of internal and external factors, including economic hardship, political and social discontent, technological stagnation, and military defeat. Some colonies negotiated their independence, including India from the British Empire and the Gold Coast from the British Empire. Some colonies achieved independence through armed struggle, including Algeria and Vietnam from the French Empire and Angola from the Portuguese Empire. Emerging ideologies of anti-imperialism contributed to the dissolution of empires and the restructuring of states. Nationalist leaders in Asia and Africa challenged imperial rule, including Mohandas Gandhi, Ho Chi Minh, and Kwame Nkrumah. Regional religious and ethnic movements challenged both colonial rule and inherited imperial boundaries. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the Quebecois separatist movement, and the Biafra secessionist movements. Transnational movements sought to unite people across national boundaries. Communism, Pan-Arabism, and Pan-Africanism. Movements to redistribute land resources developed within states in Africa and Asia and Latin America, sometimes advocating communism and socialism. Political changes were accompanied by major demographic and social consequences. The redrawing of old colonial boundaries led to population resettlements, including the India-Pakistan partition, the Zionist Jewish settlement of Palestine, and the division of the Middle East into mandatory states. The migration of former colonial subjects to imperial metropolises maintained cultural and economic ties between the colony and metropole even after the dissolution of empires. New migrations include South Asians to Britain, Algerians to France, Filipinos to the United States. The proliferation of conflicts to various forms of ethnic violence and the displacement of peoples resulting in refugee populations. Such ethnic violence include the Armenians, the Holocaust, Cambodia, and Rwanda, and displacement of peoples included Palestinians and Darfurians. Military conflicts occurred at an unprecedented global scale. World War I and World War II were the first total wars. Governments used ideologies including fascism, nationalism, and communism to mobilize all their states' resources, including peoples both in the home countries and colonies of former colonies, for the purpose of waging war. Governments also used a variety of strategies, including political speeches, art, media, and intensified forms of nationalists to mobilize these populations. Mobilization of states' resources include the Gurkha soldiers in India, the Anzac troops in Australia, and military conscription. The source of global conflict in the first half of the century varied, including imperialist expansion by European powers in Japan, competition for resources, ethnic conflict, great power rivalries between Great Britain and Germany, nationalist ideologies, and the economic crisis engendered by the Great Depression. The global balance of economic and political power shifted from the end of World War II and rapidly evolved into the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, which led to the ideological struggles between capitalism and communism throughout the globe. The Cold War produced new military alliances, including NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and promoted proxy wars in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. The dissolution of the Soviet Union effectively ended the Cold War. Although conflict dominated much of the 20th century, many individuals and groups, including states, opposed this trend. Some individuals and groups, however, intensified the conflict. Groups and individuals challenged the many wars of the century, and some promoted the practice of nonviolence, a way to bring about political change, including Picasso and his Guernica, the anti-nuclear movements during the Cold War, Viet Quang Duc by his self-immolation, and nonviolence by Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Groups and individuals opposed and promoted alternatives to existing economic, political, social orders, including communist leaders such as Vladimir Lenin and Mao Zedong, the non-aligned movement, which presented an alternative political bloc to the Cold War, the anti-apartheid movements in South Africa, participants in the global uprisings of 1968, and the Tiananmen Square protesters that demonstrated democracy in China. Militarized states often responded to the proliferation of conflicts in ways that further intensified conflict. These include the promotion of military dictatorship of Chile, Spain, and Uganda, the United States' promotion of a New World Order after the Cold War, and the buildup of military-industrial complex and arms trading. More movements used violence against civilians to achieve political aims, including the IRA, ETA, and Al-Qaeda. Global conflicts had a profound influence on popular culture. Dada, James Bond, socialist realism, and video games. Key Concept 6.3 New Conceptualizations of Global Economy, Society, and Culture. The 20th century witnessed a great deal of warfare and the collapse of the global economy in the 1930s. In response to these challenges, the role of state and domestic economy fluctuated, and new institutions of global governance emerged and continued to develop throughout the century. Scientific breakthroughs, new technologies, increasing levels of integration, changing relationships between humans and the environment, and the frequency of political conflict all contributed to the global developments in which people crafted new understandings of society, culture, historical interpretation. These new understandings often manifested themselves and were reinforced by new forms of cultural production. Institutions, global governments both shaped and adapted to these social conditions. States responded in a variety of ways to economic challenges of the 20th century. In the communist states of the Soviet Union and China, governments controlled their national economies, such as the Five-Year Plans and the Great Leap Forward. At the beginning of the century, the United States and parts of Europe, governments played a minimal role in the national economies. With the onset of the Great Depression, governments began to make more active role in economic life, including the New Deal and the fascist corporatist economy. In newly independent states after World War II, governments often took a strong role in guiding economic life to promote development. Nasser's promotion of economic development in Egypt and the encouragement of export-oriented economies in East Asia. At the end of the 20th century, many governments encouraged free market policies and promoted economic liberalization, such as the United States beginning with Ronald Reagan, Britain under Margaret Thatcher, China under Deng Xiaoping, and Chile under Pinochet. States, communities, and individuals became increasingly interdependent, a process facilitated by the growth of institutions of global governance. New international organizations formed to maintain world peace and facilitate international cooperation, including the League of Nations, the United Nations, and the International Criminal Court. New economic institutions sought to spread the principles and practices associated with the free market economy throughout the world, such as the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Trade Organization. Humanitarian organizations developed to respond to humanitarian crises throughout the world, including UNICEF, Red Cross, Amnesty International, Doctors Without Borders, and the World Health Organization. Regional trade agreements created regional trading blocs designed to promote the movement of capital and goods across national borders, including the European Union, NAFTA, ASEAN, and Mercosur. Multinational corporations began to challenge state authority and autonomy, including the Royal Dutch Shell, Coca-Cola, and Sony. Movements throughout the world protested the inequality of environmental and economic consequences of global integration, including Greenpeace, Greenbelt in Kenya, and Earth Day. People conceptualized society and culture in new ways. Some challenges old assumptions about race, gender, class, and religion, often using new technologies to spread reconfigured traditions. The notion of human rights gained traction throughout the world, such as the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, women's rights, and the end of the White Australia policy. Increased interactions among diverse peoples sometimes led to the formation of new cultural identities and exclusionary reactions, including negritude, xenophobia, race riots, and citizenship restrictions. Believers developed new forms of spirituality and chose to emphasize particular aspects of practice within existing faiths and apply them to political issues, including New Age religions, Hare Krishna, Falun Gong, and the fundamentalist movements and liberation theology. People and consumer culture became global. Sports were more widely practiced and reflected national and social aspirations, including the World Cup soccer, the Olympics, and cricket. And changes in communication and transportation technologically enabled the widespread diffusion of music and film, including reggae and Bollywood.